I'm Cristina Howorun. I was the producer and reporter of VeraCity, The Gun Chase, which aired last night. And we do have it available online, so anybody that hasn't been able to see it in its entirety can go to our website. There's lots of links all over the place. We'll make sure we share them even more. And I am so honored to be joined this afternoon with Evelyn Fox. Evelyn, hi.
Hi.
She is the founder of Communities for Zero Violence. She is a survivor. She is a victim of gun violence because, unfortunately, as anybody that watched the documentary yesterday or has been following her journey over the past 5 years knows, her son Kissinger gun was an unintended target of a shooting that happened September 11th back in 2016. So thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, Evelyn.
Thank you for having me.
We've received quite a bit of comments, and literally we've gotten a lot of response from the documentary and particularly from your story. We do have a couple of questions that we're going to address, and some of them have been directed directly at you. So I hope that that's okay if I start with you, Evelyn.
Sure.
So this one is coming from Miranda. And she says, "Hi, Evelyn. First of all, I am so sorry for the pain you have had to endure every day with the loss of your son. What do you think needs to be done in this country to get guns off the streets?"
I think that, first of all, I know what needs to be done because there was a very comprehensive research project done after the year of the gun in 2005 with the provincial government, and they released a report on the roots of youth violence in 2008 that outlines everything that needs to be done in order for youth to excel and succeed in life and to deter any types of community violence. John Tory, who then also was running for premier at that time, released a report in 2007 before the Roots of Youth Violence report was released, with the exact same things outlined in his report. I wish I could remember the name of it right now, but at this point I can't. So the two reports were released, and they are outlined with the major factor being poverty, absentee fatherism and mentorships for young males, the education system having an issue with not having the ability to acknowledge and deal with people who have suffered any kind of trauma, and it bridges the education system to the prison pipeline because they are labeled and expelled and suspended instead of actually addressing the trauma that the children have been exposed to. There's also housing issues in terms of not adequate housing and not affordable housing, or no housing at all if we're talking about today's issues. And there's a couple of other factors that are in that report as well, and it is available online. So if you Google the Roots of Youth Violence report, everything is in there, but it basically has to do with everything surrounding poverty. And the fact is that if there's no youth opportunities, there's no programming available for these children, and not just basketball and sporting programs, but they require art programs, they require tech programs, they were like, just like anybody else, the people that live in these communities have different arrays of interest and are excel in different areas. They're not, you know what I mean? Like, it's we need to have programs that are affordable and for everybody to take, not just like having like say robotics or technical type of IT stuff that is available to children whose parents can afford to pay for these programs. So these programs should be available to everybody so that people who do live in the lower income communities can access these things to excel in their lives and be awarded opportunities.
So when we talk about, and this is one of my questions, is you talk a lot about the need for programming, because programming leads to greater educational opportunities as well,
Hmm.
particularly you're talking about STEM things and
That's right.
robotics, and that is expensive. But even
Hmm.
if they're subsidized, if they're not in your neighborhood, if I think that that's a key part that might be missing,
That's
because
right.
going from the west end of the city to the east end is not easy for parents that may not, they may be working.
Hmm.
Nobody may want to send their 11-year-old on streetcars and subways and buses to get to Scarborough or to get to
Hmm.
North York.
Yep.
So is it really a lot about, does any of that have to really do with proximity and making sure that there's easier access to these programs?
Yes, because you'll notice that majority of those programs are in financially stable neighborhoods, and they're not really in the neighborhoods that require them or need them to be able to succeed. So for sure, and not only that, it's not even to say that um, some people some people can't even afford to take the transit to bring the child to there. So you know what I mean? Like you have families that are working 2 and 3 jobs just to pay the rent. That's not even to put food on the table, much less transportation for an extracurricular. So like look at the cost of our transportation. It's
It,
madness.
it's very expensive.
Hmm.
It's very expensive.
Hmm.
Even if you have free TTC ridership for children,
Yeah,
it doesn't really matter if the kid's 9 and you need and you want to be there so that they're not riding a subway
that's right.
all by themselves.
That's right.
What about one thing that we did hear a lot about, and I heard this from Dwayne Beckford, who's remanded and not guilty, but remanded on charges. And we also heard this from Marcel, was the turning point for both of them was both when they were around 12 or 13 years old. In Dwayne's case, he said, he had been fishing in creeks and collecting frogs, and then he aged out of that, which is
Hmm.
understandable, and there was nothing for him to do. And we heard that as well with Marcel, that being in an at-risk neighborhood, when they took down the basketball courts, all they had was time on their hands and trouble on the horizon. So I
Hmm.
feel like this is, I know a lot of people don't necessarily buy into it and think, oh, we just need to build basketball courts. But sometimes it might be as simple as having adequate programming that can provide those sorts of opportunities.
That's right.
We're getting a couple more questions now. And so I apologize. This one's for me. And what surprised it was comes from Noah, and it is what surprised me the most when researching and interviewing people for this documentary. Um, I would say the thing that surprised me the most was how universal a lot of the problems are. As Evelyn just said, the lack of opportunities and the lack of recreational opportunities, which sounds so simple, but really is a root cause to people getting into problems. That was very surprising. And just having it said to me by so many different people as opposed to politicians. It really felt like this really is where it's a cost effective way, and it gives people opportunities, and then they can go and pursue potentially more fulfilling, um, personally fulfilling jobs, and jobs that will potentially help them raise out of, we hear Justin Trudeau talk a lot about middle class and those working hard to be part of the middle class. And this would help a lot in pursuing those goals, but also just how freaking easy it is to get a gun in Toronto, and how there are places that guns are community guns that are hidden in different parts of the community, where that if you go behind this dumpster and you move this little piece of loose brick, that there's a gun there that you can go use and take out for the night. Just please bring it back. Or how you could rent a gun for $80 and pay by the bullet, because you
They
can't buy a
didn't.
bullet legally.
They didn't even talk about the guns that people are making in their basements.
Well, because police say that that's not the biggest issue right now, at least
It's
right now.
it's not the biggest, but it's potentially gonna, the borders in the past while have been confiscating hundreds of guns. So it's not a big problem now that we know of, and I'm not really confident on the information that we receive from public officials, because they tend to give us information that they want to provide us with. So it might not be a problem right now, but I know of a couple of youth right now who know a few people who are making them in their basements. So it has the potential to really blow up.
And if we're talking about the 3D guns, is that what you're talking about?
Mhm.
Or, right, so we actually met with, and I'll be frank, he didn't make the cut. But we met with a professor out of University of Toronto who had the blueprints and had made one of those 3D guns before. And he couldn't make us one for this situation, which is part of the reason why, but also that he didn't get into the documentary. But what we did learn was they're good for one shot. So somebody making them will have to have all of that equipment and spend considerable amount of time. But even if it works once, it may not work again.
Mhm.
So,
And they're
um,
selling them for like $3,000 on the
oh yeah,
street.
oh
So
yeah,
they're for them to buy the equipment is nothing in comparison to the money they're having coming in.
right, right.
Mhm.
So, and we know that this has been a bit of a problem, particularly out west. And if you're saying that now it's coming into Toronto, some of these interviews were conducted in the fall, so they may not have been the most up to date, or police may not have caught the most recent cases of this. Um, but they're really everywhere,
Mhm.
right? Like if you go into certain neighborhoods and you've got a couple grand, you
Mhm.
can buy a very cheap gun, no problem. You just have to make sure that you stop the right person on the street,
Yeah.
because people want to sell them because they want to make money. It could
And you
cost,
just have to get the person who's most desperate for money because
yeah,
you can bargain on how low a price you can pay for it.
that's true as well. I hadn't even thought of that, but yeah, um, we know that, if you buy a gun on sale for $200, a cheap nothing gun that just it does what it's supposed to do, which is simply shoot,
Mhm.
and you could be looking at a 10 or 20% markup, or excuse me, 100 or 200% markup by the time you
Mhm.
buy it. So people are desperate for guns,
Mhm.
um, but they are widely available.
Mhm.
And Patricia's moderating from behind the scenes. Thank you very much, Patricia. And she's sending me questions. This comes from Matt, and the question is, the cost estimates for the current gun ban have ranged from hundreds of millions to multiple billions of dollars. And I think that Matt's talking about this, for those that don't know, Bill C-21 and the regulation that was put in place in May of 2020 it proposes a buyback of the guns that they are now going to prohibit. And so they'd be buying them back from the stores that would no longer be able to sell them, but also from the owners. So there's a lot of guns that are newly banned that would cost quite a bit of money.
Mhm.
So he points that out, and then he says, meanwhile, groups like Evelyn's and Marcel is the founder of or co-founder of the One by One movement, are in need of funding. The Liberal government promised hundreds of millions of dollars to groups like these years ago, yet only 20 million has flowed, and no money has actually made it to the individual groups yet. I'd like to know how much these grassroots community groups could benefit from more funding. Would $1 billion not be better spent funding community groups rather than gun bans from legal owners? So, Evelyn, what would, even in just your case with Communities for Zero Violence, what would $100,000 do?
We'd be able to have programming nonstop and a crisis response nonstop. So, like, it's just myself and occasionally another mother, Shauna Brown, who usually does the work with me. And same with Joan Howard. Joan Howard also is another mother who usually does the stuff with me as well. So, I mean, we'd be able to have more staff, first of all, to be able to join in and help out. So and not only that, the way that we can support the families would be a lot different as well too. So like after your child is killed, like you have the burden of preparing for a funeral that like some people like myself have never had anyone close to them die, and having to prepare for a funeral, I didn't know the first thing about it. And if it wasn't for my father, like my son's funeral probably wouldn't have happened as quickly as it did. I didn't know the first thing about it. I was in like a complete daze. So I really he did everything, and I just kind of was there and said yes, no, yes, no. So I mean, you have all these things that are going on. You don't go grocery shopping because you don't leave your house. You don't leave your bed for that matter. There's all these different things, and if you have kids and grandkids and all the rest of it that are in the home with you. They need things to be able to survive day to day, right? The basic necessities, and you don't even have the basic necessities because you're in a zone and not really conscious of reality. So like 100,000 would be like a blessing. And for the gun ban, like I think for me, and I can't speak for anybody else, but for me, I think that billions of dollars into banning an object instead of spending billions of dollars in addressing the reasons why somebody wants to even pick up that object is such a complete and utter disgrace. And it really speaks volumes as to the priorities of our government in terms of investing in people. They would prefer to invest in getting rid of an object than investing in the people who voted them into the seats that they are sitting in. And I find it absolutely deplorable that that's the way that they would choose to go when it is their reason, the reason they are the reason why we are in the economical issues that we're having right now. We are basically no more middle class altogether. We either have low income or high income, and hardly any more middle class. And I'm deemed someone who is a middle class, and I still live paycheck to paycheck. So the cost of our housing is unbelievable. It's not affordable, and it doesn't, like, you literally have to move out of the GTA and even farther just to be able to survive paying your housing costs, to be able to feed your family, and then maybe you might still have a little bit left over to enjoy life. But living in this city and just in the immediate GTA, forget it. Like, how is it, how do you rationalize investing in things that in objects over people? It doesn't, like, that for me doesn't make sense.
It seems to me like a lot of what you're saying is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound, right? Because, and I forget, I apologize that I started saying that because I can't even remember what that is, what that saying, how that saying goes, but investing early in, and it feels like this has to be a longer game,
Mm-hmm,
right? That there isn't a band-aid solution. I've heard you say that several times, that
mm-hmm.
if it's a long game, we have to know that now that dollar that we are investing in that child right now will pay dividends in terms of the reduction in trauma, the reduction in violence, the reduction in poverty in the long run.
Well, if they had done what they said that they were going to do, or what they recommended they should do by their own report back in 2008, my son would probably be alive today. And I mean, like, I didn't know about the report until a couple of years after Kissinger was killed. And when I found out about it, I was livid, like absolutely livid, because that would have been the prevention and safety of so many others even before Kissinger. So all of a sudden now you want to talk the talk, you still don't want to walk the walk. And this is not something that's going to happen overnight. It's a process. It takes time. But still, nobody wants to put in the investment. Nobody, but they want to spend billions banning an object. So sorry, it's extremely frustrating for me because I have 3 other children. I have 5 grandchildren. I have countless numbers of nieces and nephews, and I can't survive another one. I cannot survive losing another family member. I cannot. And then it seems almost like if if the only way that someone is going to actually put that or make that step forward to do what is right is if one of the government officials have to stand in my shoes. And I, God forbid, I pray that no one ever has to feel that way for that to be that change. But I mean, that's what it looks like. And the politicians use the survivors as pawns in their game and their political success. And I don't know, man. Like, it's extremely frustrating. It's extremely frustrating.
It's hard, I think, because I think a lot of people we saw, they hear about shootings on the streets, they hear about massacres and, mass shootings like Nova Scotia, like Danforth. And I feel like a lot of people think knee-jerk reaction, well, if we ban guns, then everything would be okay. But we learned, and I know that you know this, that's not necessarily, criminals don't obey the law. So if you tell them that you're not allowed to shoot somebody, you're not allowed to kill somebody, they're not going to say, okay, well, I'm going to disagree with those laws, but I'm still going to go and grab a handgun and shoot that.
Right. And the thing about it is that the federal government didn't really start speaking hardcore about the banning of the firearms until the Nova Scotia shooting. And if anybody has been paying attention to that shooting, everybody knows that that shooting could have been prevented if the RCMP had acted when they were told that he was a threat. So we also have to hold the people who are responsible for our safety accountable, and nobody ever seems to want to hold these people accountable. So not only that, the person who did the shooting all had illegal firearms. So you're going to your solution to someone who had illegal firearms and who was previously reported as a danger and nobody acted on it, your solution is to ban all the firearms? No, that doesn't equate to common sense to me. And that is complete pandering to people who have absolutely no clue about the firearm laws in Canada and who have no level of understanding of the root causes of why somebody picks that gun up.
And I think a lot of that may even have to do with how there isn't a consistent approach, from city to city, from province to province, and nationally. For example, our next question comes from Lewis March, and he's
Louis.
asking,
He gets very upset when people call him Lewis. It's Louis.
Louis, I'm sorry.
That's Zero Gun Violence Movement.
Right. Okay. Well, he says, why is data made available about guns stopped at the border, discovered at crime scenes? Why is it always inconsistent? Is there an accurate database that feds, province, and municipal governments work together on? And the answer is no. The answer,
and we were just talking about that the other day.
Like, there's absolutely none. So Toronto Police has done a really good job at showing, how many shootings they have, how many injuries, how many deaths. And then, in an annual report, or if you ask, at least if you're media, if you ask, but in an annual report, they will indicate this X amount of handguns came from the United States because we traced them back, and X amount of long guns were domestic.
Well, for the city of Toronto, a couple of the gun owners that I actually met on Twitter, Azim and Glenn, thank you. They have been actually keeping track of the firearms that have been taken off the street from the Toronto police. The Toronto police, when they post the guns off the street, they have been keeping track, and they have been letting me know which ones are prohibited and restricted and that type of thing, so that we are keeping our own records to see the differences in them. So I appreciate them very much. Thank you very much, because it's time consuming, and I know that Azim, who does the actual charting of it, he's very busy, so I appreciate them both.
But what I was going to say is that Toronto Police does this, but when we reached out to Montreal and Winnipeg and Vancouver and Calgary, they don't have this data that's accessible to the public. Everything has to be freedom of information request.
But that should be public knowledge.
But they don't. And in Ontario, we know that through they can tell you how many shootings there were, but they can't tell you if they trace the guns. So in Ontario, we're blessed because we do have this phenomenal group, the Criminal Intelligence Service Ontario, that tracks all crime guns sent to them. They can not recreate, they're not creating, but they're revealing etched off serial numbers, and they can actually trace it back to the store that it was purchased in, whether it be in North Bay or downtown Toronto, or most of the case, along I-75 heading through the states. So Florida and Ohio and Michigan and a couple of other key states along that way, they can trace those guns.
Hmm.
But if you try to go to a national site, there's none
Hmm.
of that. The
Yeah.
CPSA numbers that we got in terms of guns that were seized, those were retrieved through freedom or an access to information request. And then also they knew we were working on this, so they kept on feeding me the most current numbers. But
So
those aren't
from
available to everybody.
yeah, from my experience, just by doing the research myself in terms of trying to get numbers, I found that British Columbia does the best work in terms of letting the public know how many firearms have been recovered and where they come from. So, and they actually have a dedicated unit for that,
Right.
but they post their information publicly online.
But you won't get that from Vancouver PD, for example. Just like you won't get that from Durham police here, or I shouldn't say
Oh,
that because we didn't look into them.
okay.
But not every police force posts those numbers. And in some cases, it's because, you know, in a place like Guelph, they may only have a handful of shootings a year, if any. So
Hmm.
that wouldn't be so, that's not top of mind potentially for that community.
Hmm.
Whereas Montreal, I was quite surprised that it
Yeah,
wasn't more publicly available. Ditto for Ottawa and for Winnipeg and other places where gun use is quite prevalent.
that stuff
Um,
should be public knowledge. Anything that has to do with any public agency period, everything should be transparent. So it not only that, it allows people like myself who do advocate in the communities to be able to make informed decisions. It also will allow the or disallow the government officials from playing that kind of political game against us too, right? So um, I think that it's extremely important to have that information. And I know that myself and Polly Souvian and Tracy Wilson, we have all advocated to have that that national type information available to us so that we all can have the ability to be in the know and make informed decisions on what the next step should be. So it should be available.
and it isn't, but maybe because of your work, we know that Stats Can is going to be doing a better job of releasing where crime guns are from, you know, and I guess that's them reaching out to every single police department and essentially begging them to
Hmm.
release this data. And I know that having spoken with the detective Scott Ferguson from
Hmm.
the ISO, he's really been able, and his unit has been really able to push or Ontario police forces to send them every crime gun that they find, because they have been able to connect dots. A crime gun that was used in London was connected to a murder in Toronto. They found through just these guns, they were able to track down somebody that had been smuggling well over 100 guns from Michigan into Canada, and they were able to catch that person. And that's
Hmm.
huge because
Hmm.
that's stopping a massive flow of
Hmm.
guns, because that's an experienced smuggler that knows the routes and knows how to do it and has connections and has probably crossed the border enough times that
Multiple
CPSA
times.
officers are and Homeland Security might just be like, "Hey, it's you again, Bob."
Right.
So it's huge. But if police forces aren't sending the crime guns to this unit, they're not being traced properly. So
Hmm.
there's been a big push, and so they've received far more crime guns over the past couple of years, and they've been able to do much more tracking. But that's not to say that that's happening all across Canada.
Canada.
Right?
Right.
And just speaking of stats, it's quite difficult when I try to look into how much money has been invested in youth programs and youth diversion programs and programs that are supposed to help at-risk youth avoid gang life. It's really difficult to break it down because they'll give you a big pocket of money, and I'm just going to say $100, and they'll say, here's, but 4 of it goes to here, 75 goes to police related initiatives, and you have to try and track this money that, unless you're a forensic auditor, you really can't.
Yeah.
It's very difficult, because then immediately somebody will say, oh, but don't forget about the money we put into the classroom here, and this is somehow, it's, if we just say, you know what, let's make a big investments in at-risk communities and ensure that they have proper learning opportunities, which will lead to proper employment opportunities, recreational opportunities, I feel like that would go a long way.
And if they had people who adequately, who are from the communities, who are kind of monitoring the community agencies to ensure that they are effectively doing what they need to do, because as Louis March says, that it's not that they lack programming, they lack effective programming. So it's there's a lot of agencies who claim to do the things that they do but really don't. So like when I was trying to seek services for my son, I contacted a few agencies, and one of them didn't even return my call, multiple calls. The other one met with him, two of them met with him once and then no follow through. So, and it's not to say that I didn't express that my son was exhibiting at-risk behavior, um, and that I suspected he had post-traumatic stress disorder, because I made them well aware of what the issues were. So we have agencies out here who are getting big money that are not doing the jobs that they claim that they're doing.
Well, and just so everybody knows that you were talking about Kissinger's brother, not
Yes.
Kissinger. Yes.
Yes.
Um, we're wrapping up now because we're running out of time. But Evelyn, any final thoughts?
No, but I did just want to say thank you to everyone who reached out to me online and have been very supportive. I also want to thank every single solitary person who shared the flyer, my son's reward flyer. You do not have any level of understanding how much that means to me. And it's very difficult when you are trying to seek justice for your child, um, on top of missing him and mourning him. And I just want to, from the bottom of my heart, thank everybody who shared it. I truly appreciate it.
Evelyn, before I thank you, I want to just tell anybody here who hasn't seen the suspect, because Kissinger's murder still remains unsolved, that you can find the poster for the suspect that police have been looking for 5 years on the CityNews page. If you just Google VeraCity CityNews, it's there several times. And then Evelyn, I'm just trying to find your Twitter handle very quickly because I know you tweeted it out.
CZV 416.
That's really easy. So I'm just going to repeat it slowly again. CZV 416. You can find her on Twitter. I really encourage you to follow her, not only because of her strength in sharing her story, but because you really have your ear to the ground and you're doing a lot of work in advocacy, but and also, you know, whenever I see a victim, you're always sharing their story. And I think it's really powerful. And I want to thank you so much for giving so much of your time to this project and for sharing your and Kissinger's story so wide and just so candidly and raw. And I really appreciate your strength. Thank you.
Thank you
all
so
for
much.
joining us. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you all for joining us. And if you haven't had a chance to watch the documentary, I encourage you to go to the Citytv website or just Google VeraCity, the gun chase. You should be able to find it. If not, you can hit up Evelyn because she's got a copy on her page as well. So take good care. Thank you so much. Thanks.